All right, hey guys, welcome to part 9 of why Jesus ignores all rapture prophecies and predictions all the time. I'll give you a hint. He's still building. Now, before we continue, please like and share this video and subscribe to BP, the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought, a comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome. Um, in this series, I coming off of the failed prophecy for the umpteenth time. September 23rd, 24th, Jesus was supposed to come and rapture the church. It got, well, I'm going to say worldwide attention. And which is kind of funny because it wasn't just the kooks, the illiterate people. I mean, all over people were prophesying or predicting that Jesus was going to return or rapture the church. Actually, it was rapture the church on September 23rd, 24th. Of course, we're 2 months out, going on 2 months away from that. There is another prediction, and again, as if people don't learn, they don't. And every generation or every other generation, we have a wild, failed rapture prediction. People won't learn. But this one is coming up, supposed to be now in Hanukkah. So coming up in December, I think it's December 14th around. It's Hanukkah, something like that. But anyway, it's not getting much traction. Sorry, guy, your prophecy is too close to the failed prophecies of September 23rd to 24th. But why do they? Okay, so the thing is, so why do the prophecies fail? Why? And people really think, and I'm going to say there are a lot of people that of an honest heart that truly believe they truly believe that their predictions is right. Okay, so why did they fail? Well, the reason why they failed is because um, faulty methods of interpretation. The way they read and interpret scripture, that's the problem. That's why. Okay? So I'm breaking this down, showing you, and not as in depth, okay, as I could go, but I think enough to give you an understanding. So I'm going to get into the rapture now. We talked about there were two foundational scriptures or passages that I'm using for this. One was Matthew 24. And then the other one is going to be Ephesians chapter 2. And again, I haven't gotten to Ephesians chapter 2 yet. And then some of you, especially those of you who have studied, right, prophecy, you probably are wondering, how in the heck is he coming up with Ephesians chapter 2? Hang on, we're going to get there. And so Matthew 24, is, of course, the Lord himself is teaching on prophecies, the end times. But remember I said, again, faulty methods of interpretation, not really, and then adding things to the scriptures that Jesus didn't say, adding things to the scriptures that is not there. I'll give you an example. I go back and forth with a brother. I call him a brother. He doesn't call me a brother, but I'm going to call him a bitter old brother, a bitter, hateful person. He's threatened to sue me. There's another guy on Facebook. It's saying they threatened to sue me. So, but he doesn't believe in the rapture. But his thing is always the resurrection. The resurrection of the dead. What is the resurrection of the dead? The Bible talks about the resurrection of the dead. Yes, it does. But then the Bible also talks about the dead in Christ. you know. So again, I want to get into that because again, we have to understand that phrase, "the dead in Christ," is part of the misinterpretation. He does in denying that the rapture. He says the rapture is a lie, and his theology is the word itself, raptured, and he split hairs over that. And I can say, okay, fine, catching up. Do you believe in the catching up? Because the Bible actually teaches that. Anyway, but again, faulty interpretations, and again, just things that people don't put together. So let me kind of go back. Let's jump to come on, where am I at? Here we go. So I am going to just highlight Matthew 24, and then I want to go just so we can keep the continuity here. In this chapter, now remember I said part of the reason is faulty interpretations. So here is Matthew 24, the entire chapter. Jesus is answering this question here in verse 3. Here's the question. While he was sitting on the Mount of Olives, his disciples approached him privately and said, "Tell us, when will these things happen, and what is the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?" So then remember we talked about in verse 6, you're going to hear of wars and rumors of war. See that you're not alarmed, because these things must take place, but the end is not yet. Well, what end is he referring to? Well, the end of the age. This is what he is referring to. This is what he is answering. Okay? Excuse me. We come down to verse 14. This good news of the kingdom will be proclaimed in all the world as a testimony to all nations. And guess what? And then the end will come. So what end is he referring to? Right? So let me do this quick, again, recap so that, again, you kind of have in your mind where and why I'm going, where I'm going. This is Daniel chapter 2, remember? This vision of a human form that was given to Nebuchadnezzar in Daniel chapter 2. We went through this. And Daniel said, in the interpretation, Daniel said that it was a prophetic dream. It was a timetable, a picture of all of the world dominating kingdoms. So there's a couple of things going on. One, it is a prediction of how events would unfold in the world. So from Nebuchadnezzar's day until the second coming of Jesus, 5 kingdoms would rule the earth, beginning with Nebuchadnezzar, and then the Medes and Persian, the Grecian kingdom, the Empire of Rome, and then the last dominating kingdom, which would be during the time of the tribulation period. We don't know the name yet, but Daniel did say, in the days of these kings, Jesus will set up a kingdom, as pictured in here by the rock that Daniel said that was cut out from a mountain without hands, and it strikes the image at its feet. That's timing. That is the end time, because the rock, of course, being the kingdom of Jesus, could have hit the image anywhere and pulverized it, but instead at the feet. The feet with the 10 toes represent 10 kings. Now, again, this is all kind of important because this picture here, we have to keep the continuity of this picture. When we talked about Daniel's 70 weeks, and remember Daniel's 70 weeks was decreed against Israel, the people, the holy city Jerusalem, and the temple. Okay, the holy temple. Excuse me. And so, in this timetable, he said, from the issuing of the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. This was, you can read about this in Ezra chapter 1. It began that 70-week countdown. Daniel said 69 of those weeks brings us to Jesus' time. So right to Matthew 24, where we're studying, it brings us 69 of those weeks. Daniel's 70 weeks. A week is a 7-year period of time. So Daniel's 70 weeks or 70 sets of 7-year period of time. And this decree, the 70 weeks, began doing the Mede in Persian, or the chest and arms of silver, this human form, which is human man. It's man's time of humankind. That's what the image is. Sinful humankind. So it began. So 69 of those weeks brings us to the legs of iron, which is the Roman Empire, which is Matthew 24. And he says, right up to the Messiah, and then the Messiah is cut off. And that leaves us with one 7-year period, or 1 week. And that week doesn't happen until the rise of this last kingdom, which would be the rule of the beast, the man of sin. People call him the Antichrist, but he's really not referred to as the Antichrist. But doing that rule, this last kingdom, the feet of iron and clay, that's what he says. During this week, during this kingdom, Jesus will set up a kingdom. All right. But then Jesus also says he makes a statement that because he says, when you see the abomination that called this desolation, right? That happens during this last kingdom, the feet of iron and clay. All right, so now let's go back to Matthew. And then when he says this good news of the kingdom will be proclaimed in all the world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. Well, we know the end comes when what? This last kingdom, right, arises during that time. This is when Jesus comes. Now, we're going to get a further explanation of that. So verse 15 says, so when you see the abomination that called the desolation spoken by the prophet Daniel. So we read that, we studied that, but that happens during the last 70th week. The 70th week. So then he said, verse 21, for at that time there would be great tribulation. Now remember the decree, we know this is talking about the Jewish people, the decree against the Jewish people, the prophecies against the Jewish people. Why? Because go back, Daniel's 70 weeks, it was for Israel, the Jews, Jerusalem, and the temple. So when he says, when you see the abomination that makes desolation, this is talking about the prophecies of the Jewish people. So this also is the prophecy during the 70th week, because the prince of the people have become, the man of sin, makes a covenant for 1 week, and then in the middle of the week he breaks the covenant. Now Jesus is saying here that he said for at that time there would be great tribulation, right? During this period of time. You also get further details with this in Revelation 6 through 19. And then verse 29, immediately after the tribulation of those days, Jesus comes, right? The Son of Man will appear in the sky, and then all the people of the earth will mourn. They will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And that's so that's where we are with Jesus teaching the prophecy centered around God's fulfillment of the prophecies concerning the nation of Israel. What is not talked about here is the rapture of the church. Okay? But we did say back in verse 14, when he says this good news of the kingdom will be proclaimed in all the world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. So you notice here the gospel is being preached to all the nations. And then I asked the question, so this is during the church age or the church time. What is God doing with that? Well, we looked here, we said, in Acts chapter 1. So remember, he makes the statement, he's gathered around. He says, so when they had come together, they asked him, Lord, are you restoring the kingdom to Israel at this time? Well, that's a valid question. It certainly was one that was on the minds of the apostles and the Jews. So Jesus' response to that is that it's not for you to know the times or periods that the Father has set by his own authority. But you will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, in all Judea and Samaria, and the ends of the earth. So, okay, don't worry about me fulfilling the prophecies of the Old Testament, which includes, but not limited to, that last 70th week of Daniel and a plethora of other scriptures. We touched on some, but the point is, you all don't worry about that. They're asking, are you restoring the kingdom? That's an Old Testament prophecy. Don't worry about that. You go out and be my witnesses in Jerusalem. That's what you do. You worry about being my witnesses. I then said, well, what is going on when we are a witness? Okay, when we are a witness, then what is God doing with that? And in Acts chapter 2, I'm going to slide down and look at verse 1. He says, so those who accepted the message, remember, go out and preach the message. This gospel will be preached in all the world to all nations, and the end will come. I'm asking the question now, what happens when we preach the message? So those who accept this message were baptized, and that day about 3,000 people were added to them. So that's what's going on. People are being added to what? The church. They're being added to the church. All right. Look at verse 47. Praising God and having favor with all people. Look at it. And every day the Lord added to them those that are being saved. So when the gospel message is preached, when we preach the gospel message, God is adding those that are being saved. People are being saved. So that's what's going on. That's what God is doing with the message. However, let's go further. Let's go further. And I want to go to let's go to Ephesians chapter 2. Remember I told you that Ephesians chapter 2 is okay, Ephesians chapter 2. Remember I said that there's a revelation here that we're going to study now. Okay. So remember, the end will come, right? So here's one of the problems. Let me kind of go out of this. Let me come out of this for a moment to go back to my image. So you remember Jesus asked the question. Well, Jesus didn't ask the question. I mean, when he said that when we're talking about from the time to the end, right? We said that you have the 69 weeks. Okay. Here was something that we need to kind of understand. I said that the church was not in Matthew 24. That is true. The church is not in Matthew 24. So anywhere, Matthew 24, Matthew 25, the church is not in there. The rapture of the church is not in there. The only reference would be in verse 14, or you could say from verse 3 up to 14, when he says that the gospel would be preached in all the world. So that would be the reference that's the church. So let me clarify when I say that the church is not mentioned. I think I said that I meant to say, or should have said, the rapture is not mentioned. So the church is definitely mentioned. And he says, well, okay, so um, um, because the gospel is being preached to all the nations. Okay, let me do this because I think I probably need to correct something. Let's see. All right, so yes. So look at verse 14. This is Matthew 24. So verse 14 says, this good news of the kingdom will be proclaimed in all the world as a testimony to all nations. And then he says, and then the end will come. Now there's a shift in thought because he says, so when you see the abomination, well, first of all, who is the you, right? Now understand who is the you, or the you of the you that he's been talking to all along. Okay, he's talking to his Jewish disciples, which is again why in Acts 1 they asked, "Why are you restoring the kingdom at this time?" But we know that there is a difference. Okay, there's a shift in then the focus. In verse 14, the focus is on this good news of the kingdom will be proclaimed in all the world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. Okay? So the good news, that's not Jewish. The gospel is what? Notice he said to all the world, to all nations. So all nations, that's not Jewish. But then when he gets to chapter 15, he focuses back. He shifts focus back to now the prophecies concerning Israel. When you see the abomination that causes desolation spoken by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place. So if you look at it prophetically, you go from the church, and again, not the rapture, he doesn't mention, but we're going to go from the church to now back to prophecies on Israel. How do we know? Well, Jesus said this right here. When you see the abomination that causes desolation, spoken by the prophet Daniel. Well, we went and we read that the 70-week prophecy, the decree against Israel, Jerusalem, and the temple. Now, why is that important? Why? Keep that in mind. Why is that important? Let's go back to our image. Let's go back to our image. Why is that important? So we go all the way back now as Daniel is interpreting Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Okay, so chapter 2, you see this dream. It is every world dominating, or 5 world dominating kingdoms from Nebuchadnezzar's time until the second coming of Jesus. Again, the rapture is not here. So we know it's the rapture because the rock is the second coming, is the rock that comes and destroys this human code. We also know that 69 of the weeks, starting from the chests and arms of silver, right, the Median Persian kingdoms, that 69 of those weeks literally brings us to the legs of iron, the Roman Empire, to Jesus. So from the Median Persians to the Rome, 69 of those weeks brings us to the Messiah. And then the Messiah is cut off. And then there's one remaining week which takes place during the kingdom that has not yet arise, the feet of iron and clay. So the 70th week, which is the abomination, where the abomination that makes desolation takes place, during the kingdom, this kingdom here, where the prince of the people to come, the man of sin, the beast, he makes a covenant for 1 week and breaks the covenant in the middle of the week. Now, okay, that's important. prophetically. Remember we talked about that you can, if you read scriptures, if you read the scriptures, you can locate yourself prophetically. You can locate yourself. Remember Daniel in Daniel 9 located himself prophetically. He was reading Jeremiah, his predecessor, and he was reading about the 70-week exile and said, here's where we are. We're at the end of the exile. So every kind of step of the way, you could locate yourself prophetically. Jeremiah could locate himself by the prophecies of Isaiah. Okay? Now, there are prophecies we can say haven't happened yet, so we're not there. So, for example, the abomination that makes desolation, we're not there yet. It hasn't happened. So, which also means we're not, the 70th week of Daniel hasn't happened. Because one of the key markers, see, one of the things that let us know that we're in that time will be the abomination that makes desolation. Or the man of sin. Paul talks about him in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. Paul talks about him going into the temple of God, sitting in the temple of God as God, and declaring himself as God. And then, of course, remember, right along, Jesus doing this feat of iron and clay, Jesus comes and strikes the image at his feet. You read Revelation, 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, Jesus destroys the beast with the brightness of his coming. We know that hasn't happened yet. The great tribulation hasn't happened yet. So one of the markers that we know we're in that period of time is that abomination. That's the 70th week of Daniel. Prophetically, then, so when Jesus came, Matthew, well, not only Matthew, but the apostles, okay, the apostles, they could have located themselves. They could have said, we are now at Daniel's 70th week. I'm sorry, 69 week. I'll get to it. We're at Daniel's 69 week. Why? Here's the Messiah. And it's kind of interesting because while Peter and them was fixated on the restoration of Israel, they also should have known, the Messiah is going to be cut off. Right? There it is, right there. The Messiah is going to be cut off. Right? Whoop. Daniel's, his prophecy said that. So they could have said, right now, we are in week 69. Prophetically, we are between week 69 and week 70. Because the 70th week hasn't happened. Jesus told them, when you see the abomination that makes desolation. Well, guess what? For the last 2,000 years, we haven't seen the abomination that makes desolate. I am aware there are some theologies that teach that a lot of this stuff happened back around AD 70. I'm not going to get into it here, but they're not paying attention to the details. In other words, what happened when Titus, the general, rode into and destroyed Jerusalem, which was prophesied by Jesus. We read that. He did not go into the temple and declare himself as God. That's the difference, okay? Again, I'm going to say we always should pay attention to the details. Prophetically, even 2,000 years, we are between week 69 and week 70. So the legs of iron and the feet of iron and clay. The legs of iron was Daniel's prophecies, 69-week prophecy. And then the abomination that makes desolation is in the 70th week. That hasn't happened yet. So we know we can look at that. It hasn't happened yet. So prophetically, we are between week 69 and then week 70. Prophetically. So for the last 2,000 years, we have been between week 69 and week 70. We've been between those weeks. Okay? So if you look at this, here's how we can locate ourselves. Daniel's 69 weeks, legs of iron, brings us to Jesus. Brings us to the crucifixion of Jesus. And then we know that we haven't seen the abomination that makes desolation. So we have not yet seen the feet of iron and clay. We have not yet seen the abomination that makes desolate. Okay, so right now, we are between week 69 and 70. So now remember the question I asked, what is God doing during this period of time? And now that brings us to Ephesians, which we will get to in part 10. But that's where we are. So now we're going to talk about what is God doing between week 69 and week 70. And so here's the answer. God is building a house. God is building a house. So I'm going to get into that next time in part 10. The house that God is building. All right. So don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP, the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome, and I'll see you in part 10.